It is funny. Oh, there we go.
We have begun.
We have begun. So I was wondering if a pandemic amnesty were to occur, amnesty for what is my big question. And I've been thinking that we get approached this a bunch of different ways. In our last portion of our conversation, I think we did the thing we often do, which is to dance all around the fire without stepping into the fire. I wanted to I wanted to launch in on today's episode of Totally Classic with me, Brendan McNamara.
And me, Andy Swindler.
And just define amnesty and then talk about what offenses have been committed. So if we're going to talk about a pandemic amnesty, it's fascinating that we're talking about it. In some ways, it's great. I mean, it's already talking about, I would hope, it seems to be trying to avoid, the whole conversation seems to be trying to avoid actual apology and restitution, which I think is a key element that we would have to make sure happens as well. Amnesty can mean grant an official pardon to, but as a noun, it means an official pardon for people who have been convicted of political offenses, or a decision by a government that allows political prisoners to go free, or a fixed period of time during which people are not punished for committing a particular crime, or a decision by the government to forgive people who have been committed particular illegal acts or crimes and not to punish them. So the thing we're seeing over and over again in all these definitions, right, is the committing of crimes, the conviction of crimes, things that were a violation in some way. So in a way, I was excited to see this article in The Atlantic by Emily Oster, Let's Declare a Pandemic Amnesty, because in many ways, that in and of itself as a headline is a confession. But it's a weird sidelong confession, because of course in it, the whole premise was essentially like, oh gosh, didn't we just all lose our minds there for a little bit? So I wanted to look, I was like, let's look at like what sort of things, I don't know, what crimes were committed. What like, before we talk about amnesty, we'd have to be like, well, okay, hold on a second. What crimes are we talking about? It's almost like if a husband came into a wife and was like, I'm really going to need your forgiveness. And then the wife would be like, okay. And she would expectantly wait for what would just be the next logical question, right? Maybe, who knows? Maybe once you get real open to the world and to source, you're just like, I need your forgiveness. Well, then I grant it to you. And then you can just go about your day. I don't do that. I can't do that. I've just invented a fantasy scenario in my head, and I'm already immediately very curious about what is going to happen. And happily, I'm the only person in control of it because I invented it. But that's immediately where it took me. But again, I also want to be cautious, knowing that I can enumerate the ways in which I have been harmed, which I think is important for every human being. But it's also important, I think, when endeavoring upon that process, to at least take a little, like 1 or 2 steps back from your own self in order to properly recognize where I, Brendan, have crimes or ethical violations that I would need to apologize for and gain forgiveness.
And I think that's something generally that brings us, you and I, together here.
Yeah.
Is the idea of seeking truth and seeking accountability. And I know I think we've both admitted our own failings in that.
Yeah.
In other episodes, I've talked about my own journey with apology and how hard that's been in some cases.
Yeah.
Probably still is. So, in that way, I do empathize with the kind of general idea here that, yeah, it's hard. I think it cuts down to really deep stuff around like belonging and getting kicked out of the tribe, and like, oh God damn, oh shit, if I admit, I did this, then, but the irony, and in this case, maybe the tragedy there is that, sometimes people don't really want apologies, or there's certainly the
sure,
some might call weaponization of apology, where you just go around apologizing and you never change your behavior. That's not really,
yeah.
that's not that great either. You know, a kid might learn that and be like, oh, you mean all I have to do is say I'm sorry, and then I could just keep doing this shit?
Yeah. I mean, I have 2 young children, and that's a constant. We frame out how apology needs to function, because it's like you realize pretty much as soon as you teach your children about the concept of apology, which I do think is a beautiful thing. Like, I think it's something we should hold on to as a species, very quickly. I mean, within weeks, you have to be like, okay, wait. It's not about just saying words. It's not a rote performance. You can't just say the words. Oh, I'm sorry. Well, what are you sorry for? Even honestly, even that disrupts, and I think that's the question. That disrupts immediately the ability to kind of just like do it and move on. Let's move along. Let's move on. You know, which we see in our country. We're still struggling with over like whatever racial enmity stretching back hundreds of years. People are still like, let's move on, and we still haven't moved on from that. So in many ways, like this didn't last the same amount of time, and I don't know if it's the same as like how long a relationship is how long the recovery after breakup should be. You know, that whole sort of realm of thesis, that if this is only going to occur for these 2 to 4 years, like, will we only need 8 years or something to recover from it? Or ultimately, if we don't deal with it, if we don't actually examine what the heck happened, then, or even why not do it constantly in the middle of it? That's the part I don't understand, where it's like, let's just wait to the end and look at it then. You're like, how much harm would happen then? That's like slavery. Let's just do slavery, and then when there's no slavery, then we can look back and see how cool slavery was. You're like, well, hold on a second there. I don't think that makes a ton of sense. But yeah, it's so fun. It's fundamental. Oh, it's interpersonal relationships too. But yeah, on a society-wide schema, it can be cataclysmic.
Yeah, and you're reminding me of some like bodies of work in business. You know, in manufacturing in particular, there's something called continuous improvement. It's the idea that we're just going to be constantly evaluating where we are, and seeing how we can improve and working on that. And agile is a development in the software world related to that. And you know, those are implemented with varying degrees of success. But yeah, I'm with that. You know, so what gets in the way of that? You know, something we keep coming back to is sort of this justification of panic. One, when you're talking about the amnesty definition, I also keep being reminded of amnesty. Like, declaring amnesty almost is like a kind of sheepish admission of guilt, because it's like, well, if you're asking for amnesty or forgiveness, then you must have done something. So there is that there. So there's some element of admitting that the impact did not match the intent. We can maybe use that framework.
Yeah.
And I probably hold the intent in a higher light than you do. I'm not sure you always.
Well, to me, it's just, I think and this is why I don't mind, we talked about this offline, but I don't mind justifying the harm if people can't see it. Because I demand the same, because I was like, if people like, crimes, what crimes? Show me the crimes. I was like, well, okay, well, it's hilarious that you're then, and the victim blaming happens very soon, right? Well, why didn't you just get vaccinated then? Oh, wow, that's what we're doing. You didn't. So why did you dress that way in that neighborhood? Okay, I see where we're at. But the funny thing is like, here I'm amongst the victims. There's a bunch of victims all over the place. I'm just I was barely victimized, but I was adjacent to it and aware of it. And then people are immediately like, meh, proof. I was like, okay, it kind of sucks if you're in the victim mode, right? If you're the oppressed, to then prove your oppression. But I'm down for it because I'm rigorous like that with other things. So I'm like, okay, well, if I can't see it, show me it. Now I'm going to live in a place where I want to be able to see it. You know, I want to be able to see the crimes. But this is the hard thing I think that's happening now, where it feels like for people who are like, oh, there's a lot of crimes we have to address here, that people want to, rush through the process into, cool, it's done now, you know, or the sense of, well, we're all to blame. This is something we all do. And again, we see this with slavery, right? When you talk about American slavery and people are like, okay, well, yes, but everyone was doing it. Like every nation on the earth, every people type has enslaved other people. And you're like, okay, yes, sure, yes. In that case, you can like sort of eventually prove that. Even though, is that relevant? Right. So for example, if everyone panicked and let's say everyone did do blank, blank, and blank, everyone did do that, doesn't make it any less of a crime. It's like, well, it was like the purge, we thought it was the purge. Okay, well, that just explains your motivation for why you did a terrible thing, but you still apologize for a terrible thing, hopefully. I mean, even children, young children, that's how we hopefully were raised and hopefully are teaching our own children. But yeah, it's just briefly before I forget it, you brought up a cool thing about the sort of tribal things or belonging, panic and belonging. And so I was like, I hadn't considered that. That's a good thing to frame in my brain empathically, is confession of crime for some people, especially in as much as they identify as part of a group. If they confess crime individually and they hold either consciously or unconsciously that what they did was what the group said to do, then if they say it's a crime, they're essentially accusing everyone in their tribe of crime, of ethical failure, which might make it hard for a lot of people who hesitate to accuse others. Hopefully everyone's ready and willing to admit fault wherever it can be demonstrated at all times. But it would be it's a different impetus. It's a different weight to be like, we, and by we, I mean, I don't know, progressive academics in the greater Boston area, or whatever. I can't remember where Emily.
There are no progressive academics in the greater Boston area.
Yeah. So like, whatever, whatever you consider whatever your tribe is or whatever. But I wanted to look at like amnesty for what? Like what are the things that harmed us in this time? I mean, for me, hilariously, it's actually probably most harmful on an individual level, meaning maybe perhaps in panic, or what I would say in induced panic, that people retreated to tribalism. And I think we have I think that's where, I don't want to say this first, even though it's maybe in some ways the smallest, but it's the failings of individual people that is the most harmful and the most criminal, and where the most amnesty needs to be sort of potentially offered after conviction. Because I love amnesty. Let me just say that out loud. I love the idea of forgiving people who have been convicted and apologize. I mean, that is in many ways, that's the entire Christ framework, but it doesn't skip any of those steps. You can't just be like, well, you're already forgiven. Forgiven for what? So yeah, on the individual level, I think that's honestly where the biggest amnesty needs to come in, is where people, and maybe this is also for me personally, of like being shut out of a lot of relationships or conversations, and like people dealing with people in a way that has never been appropriate, at least in my entire 44 years on the planet, of like, I don't like what you're saying, blocked. I don't like what you're saying, we're not friends anymore. I don't like what you're saying and how you're saying it, I don't want to talk to you anymore. Like what world do we live in where it's just like, and we talked about this in the freedom of speech episode too, but I was like, we've fundamentally tossed off not only like a tentpole of the American experiment, but I think an experiment of all sort of democratic arrangement, or I would even say any sort of like holistic, like human tribe sort of ethos, which would say, again, diversity is our strength, right? Diversity of opinion, more importantly than anything else, is our strength as a species, diversity of thought.
Yeah. And I know we've talked about this, that seems potentially justified, that individual portcullis.
Yeah.
Good word. It seems to have been justified in the sense of protecting the greater tribe.
Yeah.
Like, you are a threat,
Yeah.
identifying you as the virus.
Yeah.
Whereas I was trying to think of the right term. I sort of think of you as I don't know, more like the canary in the coal mine or the whistleblower, or I think there's some other term that's like, you know, the one ringing the bell, being like, wait, like,
Yeah. In biblical speech, it's I think the voice in the wilderness crying out.
And in addition to our friendship, that's what struck me. It was like, like, what's going on here? There's something else. And yeah, I don't like, it's funny when you first said individual, I didn't know if you were talking about that kind, like just between friends and canceling each other, but also the individuals who had a ton of power to make decisions and influence.
Sure.
Which maybe that steps out of the individual realm, because then we're talking really about like kind of their mass influence.
Yeah.
But you're talking about like the one-to-one, the individual to individual, the interpersonal. And that is tragic. And I'm starting to see some signs of that as I'm getting a little more bold and going out. And I mean, all I'm doing is like sharing some Instagram stories. I'm not like writing like, CCs.
Yeah.
And I'm starting to just get tastes of, I think, what you've been in the muck of for a couple of years now or so.
Yeah, and that's helpful for me, actually, that it helped me feel seen when you were like, oh, and we talked about things, then you were like, oh, I talked to someone about that too. And I was like, oh, cool, how'd it go? And you're like, oh, not great. It's a good validation that like, when I see it happen to other people, and I've seen this too in terms of even just friends and strangers or whatever throughout the past couple of years, but when it happens to other people in other scenarios in all different layers of intimacy, of like pre-established intimacy, like best friends, acquaintances, like accountability groups, strangers, whatever. And it happens to all different kinds of people. That helped me feel less like I was the harm. You know what I mean? Because I was certainly accused of such. That was helpful in terms of like, okay, I'm not crazy. People are super weird. People are being weird, and inappropriate. And then secondly, it was helpful too, in that like, because it happened to you, I was like, I mean, which is not that I desire for you to be victimized in any way, shape, or form in your life, but it made me feel less alone in that. And hopefully I was like, oh, it gave me stronger empathy for you, that you were like, you hadn't experienced that sort of like weird, like social disruption element in terms of like communication. And it helped me understand, just as we talked about like fear, like having people around you who were afraid of COVID, and I had no one around me really who was afraid of COVID at all. And then, and likewise, I was like, oh, so you probably had an entire different experience from like 2020 to 2022 in that realm, simply because that wasn't part of your dialogue, where I was like, when this Amnesty stuff comes up, I'm way more activated, because I'm like, well, wait a second. What do you mean just Amnesty? No one said, like, people have been, and this is just, I'm gonna take it down all the way to personal. People have treated me like hilariously poorly for 2 years, just for saying things, evidence-based, reason-based things. But I realized I had that experience because of the canary in the coal mine effect, or whatever. The fact that I was like, I'm not a compliant person generally, and I'm a talkative person. So I've been asking why and questioning it and trying to dig in and trying to get people to like engage on it for always. I mean, since March 2020 or whatever. So then I did have an entirely different experience than you, and knowing how different our experiences were also helps me go, oh, okay, this helps me understand why I don't always need to respond with such incredulity when people express a confusion as to like pandemic amnesty, and how I'm like, heck no. And they're like, what do you mean? I'm sure someone did some wrong things, but like, what harm? Again, people just saying, well, what do you mean? What harm happened? And part of me wants to go, what are you talking about? Like, it's been 2 years of like nonstop. I mean, my list here of things that need amnesty for is long, but I was like, anyway, being able to like talk through your experience. And this is why we should have been talking. Everyone should have been talking to everyone from the beginning. So we could understand, oh, wow, you're having a completely different experience here, and why, and why.
And so to me, it's like at least two big categories of fear, as I see it. One is from wherever, multiple places it came from, the fear that they, and this, gosh, we keep turning this one over. Like, why did we choose to trust who we chose to trust in terms of the government? And actually, I was just talking with a friend about this, about Amnesty, and who had not even heard that term, and it was just,
Yeah.
And you know, and I was trying to think back to some of those early reports, like, because I think you have gone back. I think there were, you know, you were asking the questions back then, but part of what's up here, part of the argument seems to be we didn't know. And
yeah,
and I was like, well, so there's no, this keeps,
yeah,
there were some things I think we did know.
yeah,
And there were a lot of things we didn't know.
yeah, yeah,
And kind of you and I think align that in the event that we don't know, that's more reason not to take certain actions that harm people.
yeah,
Like, we really, there's certain things like, well, and you've got your whole list, but there's certain kinds of harm that, you know, we really must be quite certain about if we're gonna activate that.
yes,
In the vein of serving some greater good. I mean, that's what all seems to revolve around. It's like, well, this, yeah, you know, you got to break some eggs to make an omelet kind of deal.
Sure. Which, listen, it's not inaccurate. You know what I mean? Listen, this is the justification for war. Generally, you're like, well, we have to do harm in order to stop this continual harm this particular group of people is causing, or whatever, right? Like, we got to go kill the Nazis because they're killing everybody. They're killing all the Jews. Like, we have to go get them. You're like, okay, well, I mean, it kind of makes sense. This is going to be horrible. People are going to die. We're going to be killing people, like human beings. But at the same time, you're like, oh, I
PTSD and
yeah. I mean, this is going to affect us forever. But we will, in most of the cases, we will willingly take on this self-harm in some ways, you know. And I think, that's the wild thing, is it's the imposition of a singular, or whatever, semi-singular, tribalistically singular interpretation of what was the greatest good. And I think now, I mean, this is when people say amnesty, part of me wants to jump on it like a dog on a bone with a little bit of meat on it, maybe even some fat, and be like, okay, see, this is people just saying we were wrong, except they're not saying we were wrong, because I guess then there's legal culpability or whatever.
Well, and this friend went back to say, like, well, you know, what was the CDC and the World Health Organization saying back then?
Yeah.
I was like, is that who we're trusting? I mean, is that maybe who we trusted back then? I don't know. Maybe there was a more argument for that. That's certainly not who. I think that's one thing we all agree on. It's like, with CDC, it's like, oh, it's just a mess right now, which is extremely unfortunate. I think you and I are both quite sad about that. We wish our government had a functional, like.
Oh yeah. I mean, for me, I was always, I mean, I've never been that like excited about what the government's up to, but like, you always want them to be better, right? Just like yourself. The thing that really hurt me like that was the like kind of news media, like realizing how news media didn't care about the truth. Really, they were very similar. They were just like regurgitate press releases. Essentially, they were like, well, what does the CDC say? What does the WHO say? And I was like, wait a second, like, I thought we were science people. Like, I thought this is I mean, to me, like a viral pandemic comes along, I'm a Christian, so like, science is not my be all and end all. But I was like, well, I'm raising my hand for going, this is a job for science, you know? And instead, people are like, well, what do the experts say? And again, as I've talked about on the show many, many times, expert opinion, the WHO's opinion or the CDC's opinion, is the least relevant thing we should be talking about. So to me, I was just like, well, wait a second. People like ran in a panic and then went and did the least relevant scientific thing. I was like, what is happening? You know what I mean? That was so to me, it's like, well, what did we know? And then you're like, well, and this is the crazy thing. This is what happens immediately. People go, well, what did we know? And then they immediately go, well, and they point away from themselves. What did they know? It's like, oh, that's fascinating, right? And listen, I say that out loud, being like, I've certainly done that. My kids do it often. If you accuse my eldest daughter of doing something wrong that she has done, even if she knows it, she will say, yeah, but, and she will point the finger And to be like, but Moses does this and you didn't say anything the time that she, but you know what I mean? The fingers immediately start pointing in every direction whenever we feel convicted at all. And I've done it. Yeah, you're raising your hand. I'm raising my hand. I absolutely have done
I was
that.
thinking I have 5 fingers. They can point in every direction.
Yes, exactly. Right. Every direction but me. Oh no. So I think, I mean, in some ways, even the system of examining it, I think is very revelatory. And I'm hopeful we can all learn from this. Again, I don't mean all this is like just stunning castigation of what a bunch of grossies we are. We're that too. But my whole hope, even in examining this, is like, oh yeah, well, how do we heal? And how would we get to a place of actual like forgiveness
Well,
for others, or even then forgiving others. I'm not really that much. People are into like forgiving themselves. I don't really necessarily believe in that, but in forgiving others for the things that we do as well. I think there's great healing. There's great mutual healing in that process.
yeah, and that very much harkens to, restorative frameworks and things that I'm
Yeah.
quite fond of and study, and I think can be very effective if taken seriously, and if executed well, they can also actually cause more harm if not. And that's
Sure. Yeah.
important right now, is this whole question around amnesty has the potential to create even more harm and separation. And I think 2 things I want to mention. So one is it's interesting. Like, I think for myself, I don't think I knew much about the CDC or the WHO.
Oh my gosh, what normal person does?
And I probably imagined that they were either actually made up of scientists, or they were referencing good science and good scientific information.
Yeah.
And so that may be something you can comment on. But to kind of wrap up the thing around, I was saying 2 pieces of fear. I mean, one, I think the most dominant form of fear was just like this. It just feels like this like death grip on the idea that this is the only answer, this must be the answer, this is the way to keep us safe. And if you are poking any holes in that, you are the threat, you are the problem.
Yeah.
The other side of that fear, probably even a deeper fear, is I don't want to face the complexity that I could be wrong, because then everything unravels from there.
Yeah. Well, and I think that is an advantage. And I think that's why, whatever, people label it like team reality is sort of how people have sort of termed themselves in the past 2 years, of people being like, here's what's really happening. Stop listening to just what people say about things. Here's the data. Here's the evidence. Here's what's actually happening. Here's what we had beforehand, that sort of thing. Anyway, the team, the sort of team reality folks have, I totally lost my thought. This is what happens when I sidetrack in the middle of my sentence. Wait, what was the last thing that you said?
I was talking about the fear and everything unraveling.
Oh, unraveling. Yeah. So then if people don't have the pattern of self-examination and assuming I make mistakes a lot, I think that made this whole time period and makes this process of healing phenomenally difficult. Because I do think there is, and this, this is adjacent to, but I'm not launching into the whole generation snowflake or whatever, but it is adjacent to that, meaning I think we do have generations of people who are like, I don't do anything wrong. Like nothing I do really is what you would term wrong. But when you can actually demonstrate that people have done something that is harmful or false, then people are like, well, wait a second, that's a lot like wrong. And then I honestly think we have a fantastically huge amount of the population that has no experience in really reckoning with that, and even all the way from childhood. Like I watched, my little brother was kind of raised that way. I remember talking to him one time when he was like 12 or 14 or 15 or something like that. And I was like, we were kind of talking through kind of problems he was having, or sort of things, a disjointed or disconnected feeling with his existence. And I was like, well, okay, well, what about you? Like, what things have you done wrong? And he looked at me like confused. And then I was like, well, like, what about generally? Like, what are the things you tend to do that are like wrong? Like, what are your sort of, I didn't use sin, but like, essentially, like, what are your sinful tendencies? Like, do you tend to be selfish? Do you tend to be myopic? Do you tend to be obsessed? Like, whatever. And he looked at me with like such a ferocious blankness that I was like, I don't know what to do here. I was like, he's never even considered, he's like 15 or whatever. He's never really considered that concept, that anything he does would like be termed wrong. There's just like the things that he does. And I was like,
all the
oh,
wrong things other people do.
yeah, sure. Right. That I would assume almost everybody would be able to come up with that list. And in many ways, I think whatever your list is for other people, I know this certainly for myself. The list I come up with of wrong things other people doing, I was like, most of them, not all, but I'd say 60 to I'm at the point, I feel like this is me, a healthy me, that like 60% of the things I find problematic with other people are my problems. And I've reduced that from at some point, it was way closer to 90, you know?
Oh yeah.
But if you don't have that practice, and it's why I think a lot of team reality people tended to be like religious people, like new age folks, or whatever, Christians or whoever, Catholics or whatever. Like there was a dominant percentage of people that I was seeing sort of dealing with, at least online, of being like pushing back against the narrative or holding the rallies, or there was a heavy dose of people who I think patterning, like even if they wouldn't call it, like a new age person might not call it wrong, but like releasing attachments that trigger them on this, that, and the other, you know what I mean? People were patterned into kind of like regularly doing this, engaging in the process of like, where have I fallen short, or where have we fallen short as a species? And so I've tried to have empathy for people who I was like, well, some people just don't even know, again, like my brother looking at me, there was like, they might even know really what I'm talking about. You know, even the concept of crime or wrong, or like, I made the wrong decision, I made a bad decision, you know, people would just be like, I don't really know what language you're speaking.
Yeah. I mean, that's actually a really helpful way to characterize the intersection of, I don't know, let's just call it like self-awareness and social justice.
Sure. Yeah.
To use some simple terms, like, because I went very deep in self-awareness, which we could also call consciousness and transformation and all kinds of things. And I expressed on the show that I then became quite disappointed how little of that I saw in social justice areas. Some do, some don't.
Yes.
You know,
but it's very hard to do both the inner and outer work.
It is. And I think
certainly concurrently.
I made some wildly false assumption that it's just like, well, you know, people who are really serious about social justice are going to be doing that inner work, and it's just not there all the time. And I'm you know, yeah, I'm not perfect in it either by any stretch.
Yeah.
But that's funny, because I often kind of do diminish myself there, and I think that's been a weird. I've kind of approached the social justice world from a place of deficiency.
Oh, interesting.
And
yeah.
Humility is good, right?
Sure.
Always, I think. But deficiency is not, particularly when I have actually spent quite a bit of time developing certain like awareness of myself and just how to even the process for doing that, which I think could be applicable here.
Yeah.
So I know we didn't get very far last time. So you have a list.
Yeah, I wanted to talk through things of like, this question of amnesty. And then again, we can also tie this in attendant to how we maybe manifested these things. So to me, the first thing of like the first amnesty, when she said that, I was like, oh, they mean what I call like institutional Me Too. So like vaccine mandates, mask mandates. Essentially, the reason I call that an institutional #Me Too is the premise of both of those things were, quote, do this or else you'll never work in this town again. And I say that especially as an actor, literally. Like SAG is just, my union is just starting to wrangle with this now, of like, there have been people, now I moved out of LA, so my auditions dried up for my own purpose. So this is not about my victimization, but there are many people who have been deprived of the opportunity to work because of vaccine mandates on set. Disney just let go of theirs like a month or so ago. So for well over a year, like actors weren't allowed to work unless they let someone stick something in their body. And yes, I know I'm gilding the lily to make it very Me Too-ish, but it is either let me put this on your mouth, open your mouth, now close it, now shut it, now put this thing on it, put on this bondage gear, or let me stab this thing in you. Let me prick you. Let me give you this prick. There you go. That's it. That's the Me Too part. Let me give you this prick. So yeah, that was it's #Me Too, right? And so to me, I was, again, this is the thing of like, wait a second, I thought we don't like this, you know? And so that's immediately what I thought is like something that needs to be a conviction or apology for. And then we do have to, though, get to a place of forgiveness, or else we're stuck in really just the people who are left out of employment, who have been banned by people doing terrible things. We, like those who have been victimized, cannot let that victimization define them, you know? Like some people put cancer survivor, rape survivor in their bio and stuff. And hey, if you have to do that for a season, awesome, do it. Don't do it forever. Don't, please don't, because it's not all you are. It's great that you did that. It's great that you got through that. It's great that you survived this terrible imposition against you, but it can't, it won't behoove you long-term to live in the place of like, yeah, but what they did to me, and I'm never going to forget it. I mean, in some ways that's, because I feel like these sorts of harms of just like lack of employment, loss of friends, these are harms, you know, they're not lynching, they're not evisceration, but they're, you know, but we also are a delicate society, I think, quite prone to anxiety, quite prone to depression. And I just saw like 30% of people or something like that are on ADHD medicine. I mean, something like insane. I was like, wait, what? I was like, what is happening? And that's just prescription. But anyway, so it's like, we are a little messy, but I was like, in some ways there is a moment there to slide into it, this with what I'm talking about here, not obviously rape or cancer, but to slide into PTSD, to kind of like almost choose it a little bit. There's a little bit of an element of autonomy in there. And I wouldn't want people to swing into that. But I think that's just something that violates an ethical principle, especially in the case of SAG is a great example of it violates a principle that we hold dear, you know.
Yeah. I don't know. I keep going back. I think it's in the same category to the case in New York.
Mm.
I think was it 1,100 folks who were fired a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
For not being vaccinated. And well, no, the vaccine didn't exist back then. Was it for not being vaccinated?
Yeah. So early 20, so about a year and a half probably at this point.
Year and a half. Okay, yeah, it was okay. So early mid 2021. And then the Supreme Court of New York just ruled that was officially not right. And
yeah.
I don't know. I think told the state to get there. Was it the city or the state?
I think it was statewide.
Okay.
I could be wrong.
I should double check this one before I start quoting it. But in any case, that one stood out as more like, I don't know, more official in a way. And, you know, and of course you get that apart and be like, oh yeah, but that Supreme Court is conservative, or I don't know, whatever. But
right. And that's why.
Then again, we get back to the everything unraveling standpoint. So I'm like, okay, well, for now, a Supreme Court, you know, declared that this was wrong. And one thing that always comes up to me as a question is, you know, what's changed? Mm-hmm. Like you said, Disney's letting up on these rules. Like my dad's in assisted living, you know, they no longer require masks. I'm like, have things gotten better?
Yeah, I mean, people have stopped imposing to this quite the same degree. There are universities across the nation that have vaccine mandates. Actually, Northwestern just called me for money the other day, and as they do. And then while I was asking, I was like, well, let me ask you a few questions. I was like, do they have a vaccine requirement at Northwestern? And the person calling me to ask me for money said no. And then I looked it up online, and they do. Maybe he was like loopholing, because it's like if you're not in person, you don't have to be. But I was like, you have to be vaccinated to be there on campus as a student or staff. So that would be an example of like still continuing. Articles are being written on a weekly basis of like bringing mask mandates back. They're talking about it in LA that they would bring it back if the cases got to a certain level. People are advocating for return of these things, and then vaccine mandates still exist all over the place. Like vaccine requirements are still at every level of business that and this is why, again, when you say an amnesty, you're like, we're in the middle of it. You're like, let's have a slavery amnesty. And you're like, 6 states still have slaves. Like, what are you talking about? You know what I mean? Let's actually get rid of all the things that we know you're going to be asking for amnesty for before we can even get to that, you know, cart before the horse thing. And I think this is what needs to be apologized for the institutional Me Too. So vaccine mandates, mask mandates are all do this or else you'll never work in this town again. They're coercion to override bodily autonomy. There's power pleasure for those imposing, almost certainly. And there's no tenable rational reason for the imposition. And there's a culture of silence as to complaint, which is very similar to Me Too, seen as a bad person, essentially, if you raise the issue. It's like, why are you trying to rock the boat? Like Miramax is a great company. Like we're an industry leader in independent film. Like just Harvey has his problems, but we're not, let's just do amnesty. Let's just have an amnesty. It's like, he hasn't even been convicted yet. Like I didn't even get to tell, like he didn't even admit he raped me, or whatever. So like, yeah, the mandates, I think in some ways are the biggest thing. And in some ways they're also the biggest thing because they're the least recognized. Like people just won't cop to those, even though everything I just said certainly is an angle, a point of view on it, but they're all accurate. That's all real. And that's something we also don't like in the Me Too sense. So it's very weird to me that all of a sudden we have very interchangeable ideas about bodily autonomy as it relates to sort of individual sovereignty or harm or what's good for the company or good for the, whatever, good for the tribe. But I think that's a huge one because it's still ongoing. And it's also, I think it's the ones I bring up too, and people give me a blank look or basically say, you're a delusional a-hole.
Well, I was at a meeting yesterday that had a vaccine requirement, although quite hilariously, I was so confused about how to get in the building. I ended up going in the back entrance and having somebody let me through all these security protocols.
Yeah.
Without ever showing it. And I'm like,
yeah.
Well, they're not taking it that seriously.
Yeah. Well, but that's even, I mean, of course, to me, I was like, that's even worse, right? Because then you like have a policy, and that keeps happening to me at doctors' offices. I've been to a bunch of doctors' offices that have signs outside that say, like mask required, and then nobody makes you put a mask on. And I was like, maybe it's just about laziness and pulling a sign down, or that's our official policy. We're going to say out loud that we're doing that, but then we're not actually doing it. In which case I was like, so wait, so you're a hypocrite because you don't really. So then, because if it was something if you were a true believer, I mean, again, this is like people who wear masks now outside still. You're like, well, heck, I mean, I don't respect it, but I'm like, I understand it. I was like, oh, you're a true believer. You're like, that's what is up. And so if you're going to, I mean, again, but this is my bias, and I don't know if you have the same bias. I tend to hold the people in ignorance more culpable than those who are true believers. Like, let's say, for example, just let's break Godwin's rule or fulfill Godwin's rule and talk about Nazis. The people who are like hardcore brown shirt, Heil Hitler, and meant it to the core of their being, I'm less mad at them, which is weird, than people who are just like, well, I don't want any harm to come to me and my family. I'm just following orders. Those people, I was like, dude, you have no excuse. You're not even like volitionally, you're doing the same terrible things, but you don't even have a belief system to support it. Like, and I know many people who think opposite, you know what I mean? They're like, no, those with the vile belief system would be the reprehensible ones. But I do have a tendency to be like, yeah, to castigate the follower more than I even castigate the leader.
Okay, so I did feel the urge to actually look up the New York thing because I so poorly quoted that.
Oh, is there a way to pause the recording and it still continue like when we press play again or whatever?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I just